I'm going to start with a few introductory questions for Jen. And so the first one I wanted to ask was how you got started with databases.
Well, my background is actually artificial intelligence, so I spent my early career building artificial intelligence systems for text recognition, and I dealt with early email systems, which probably dates me quite a bit. So then artificial intelligence became no longer trendy, and I moved into business intelligence. So I moved from AI to BI because I like sequences. And I realised then that I liked data. I was used to pushing data around with a view to business benefit, and I was also accustomed to dealing with algorithms. So I have lived through an entire technological cycle because AI is now trendy again. So suddenly I'm cool again, and I haven't been cool for a very long time.
Great.
That's how I went into databases. It was actually through using it for an interesting projects.
Okay, great. So how did you get started volunteering in the SQL Server community? How did you get started with PASS?
I actually was a speaker for SQL Bits, and I've spoken at SQL Bits since the 7th one. And then I attended a PASS meeting at the Bank of America offices in London, and that was a few years ago now. And then I was curious to know more about PASS, I guess, because I understood there was a global group, but it didn't seem to meet very often in the UK. So I then became more familiar with PASS, really through a job that I had where I met other community people, and they were quite interested in doing some community things, and we stumbled upon it more than anything else. So it was really as an accident. So, is everyone still there?
I'm sorry, I'm here. I had myself muted. Jen, I'm sorry. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was what you do for PASS now.
What do I do for PASS now? I can't remember. I do a lot of different things. So I'll list you some of the things I've done. So 2014, I was responsible for the virtual chapters portfolio, and that was quite interesting. I revamped the virtual chapters by, first of all, refreshing some of the leadership. I recognised that some individuals really should have been recognised by the community, so I took steps to make that happen. I also rebranded things like the Cloud Virtual Chapter. It was the Azure Virtual Chapter, but I rebranded it Cloud so that it expanded it to make it more attractive. And I did introduce the Big Data Virtual Chapter and also the Excel BI one. I recognised that PASS needed to be more broad in terms of their topics and their subject offerings, so that's why I focused on those in particular. So the other thing I did in 2015 was I inherited, or I took on, the business analytics portfolio, and that was for me a big step. Some business analytics is something that I do every day, so I wanted the opportunity to try and do something that was more strategic, and that's what I did really. So I bolstered the virtual chapters. I supported Wendy to do that so that we had more BA content, and then I moved towards doing the Business Analytics Conference, which was held in San Jose last May.
Okay, great. So with that, we're going to jump into a question from one of our attendees, and they want to know, if you're elected, what will you do to improve PASS?
And what would I do to improve PASS? I think there's a few things there. I think the first thing I would encourage is more transparency. It's something I've tried to do myself. So I have been blogging about my journey in the PASS board. It depends on my commitments, how often I feel I can do that. And I think I would like to see more of that. I think I would like people to come along in the journey with me. The other thing I'd like to do to improve PASS is, I guess, more industry awareness of where the technology is going. It's something I do as part of my role anyway, as an industry watcher, as an analyst, and try to make sure that PASS is partially driven by what we see as the future of technology. So that's not just database technologies, but also things like cloud technologies, analytical technologies. It doesn't mean, though, that the database crowd should be left behind. I mean, absolutely not. The world is full of data, and the amount of data is increasing all the time, and I think the database guardianship role is going to become more prevalent and even more important than it is now. But I'd like PASS really to be a supporter and an enabler of people to have opportunity to do better at what they do now and to learn and get skills that they need in order to, to keep themselves in cups of tea, as it were, to keep themselves gainfully employed.
Sure. Okay, great. So the next question also comes from one of our attendees, and it talks about, well, I'll just ask the questions. They say, I see many more SQL professionals getting into data science. What are some of your ideas about goals for PASS in regards to data science and Azure?
Now, I think what I'd like to see is more around things like Azure ML, Azure Machine Learning, and I'd like to see more opportunity for people to learn things like R, Python, and these other more analytical technologies. But I think it's also a very new thing, and people are not born knowing this stuff. They have to have resources to be able to do that. And I know myself moving, I did AI and then I did BI and then I'm moving back from BI back into AI. What I feel is that I think people are starting to make that journey and they don't always know where to start. Because data science, when you look it up on the internet, there's so many hits. And I think what I'd like to see is more content from trusted individuals. And I think that's not just about the Business Analytics Conference, but also about the material that we offer, so things like the virtual chapters, maybe having dedicated chapter sessions that talk specifically about data science. I don't think PASS should compete with other data science activities that happen. I think PASS can help enable those, because we have a good volunteer structure and we have people that are interested in learning and being part of the community. And I think the whole thing is about by giving you actually learn as well. So I think there's tremendous scope there for people to get involved and have fun and learn about things like data science along the way.
Okay, great. So the next question I have talks about growing leaders in the community. With the election upon us, we always talk about where do we get more leaders, how do we get more people that are qualified and ready to run for the board. So I was going to ask you, any thoughts on that? What can PASS do to grow more people that become potential board members and leaders of the organization?
I think my first point about transparency would allow people to see whether the role is for them or not. I think with specifically when I look at Europe and the world outside in North America, what I do think is that I think there's a problem with people committing the time because the time zone differences are so great. So I sometimes speak to people in the Pacific Standard Time Zone. That's an 8-hour time zone difference for me, and I think that's a bit of a blocker. I'd like to see that lifted, I think. So I think it's what PASS can do in terms of growing the leaders in the community. I do think we should do more in the professional development sphere. What I've proposed before is something like fireside chats as a virtual chapter. Professional development, perhaps taking that on, where they take people who are leaders in the community and give them the opportunity to tell their story, and in a very comfortable interview podcast style of environment, and hopefully that might grow people. I think as well in terms of growing the leaders in the community, I think diversity is really important for that. I think if you are a leader and you're starting to lead small teams, for example, you need to be very sensitive to people in their backgrounds. And I think what PASS can do is allow people to become more familiar with people from other backgrounds that don't perhaps come across every day. So for example, there's only 3 million Scottish people living in Scotland at the moment, so I'm one of them, so I'm a little person, so it'd be nice. So people in the vast majority won't come across many Scots very often, but the point being that it passes a good leveller where you can connect with people from any part of the world, really any time via Twitter or the forums, because otherwise they say the number 1 out of 3 million wouldn't be able to do the things that I do without these wonderful social media enablers that we have today.
Okay. Great. So our next question comes from one of our attendees, and it's about the future of the Business Analytics Conference and the Summit. And their question is, where do you see the past Business Analytics Conference and the past Summit in 3 to 5 years from now, given the latest trends? And the trends they mention specifically are cloud, AI, data lake, etc.
Yeah, what I think is where there will be, I think Summit, we'll start with Summit first. I think Summit will get larger. I really do. I think we'll end up covering so much cloud content and so much machine learning content, for example. I think that will start to grow. Where the BA fits in, I see the business analytics portfolio is being more aimed towards the business user, the people that would consume the data. So they're not the people who would necessarily attend Summit. They're not the people who would necessarily sit through a technical session, but they would look at the technology from the business perspective. They would be the person who would come along and bug you for data. They'd come along and say, well, I want data because I want to do this or that. The next thing, they make decisions based on it. So I do still see the BA conference as being quite different. I don't see it as a rebranded Microsoft BI conference. I don't think it's going to be a damp squib of a BI conference. It's not about that. It's about trying to reach people who make decisions with data. And that's not your technical crowd at all. It's
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So my next question is about communicating with our members, and you talked a little bit about transparency, and you've kind of touched on this in a couple of your answers. But specifically, how would you plan to communicate with our members while you're on the board?
I write a blog at the moment, and actually like writing my blog. I think it would be good if I had my own little space on the official past site that I could just push content to whenever I liked. I think because it goes in the past site, it probably has to follow some rules somewhere. So the reason I write my blog is because it's my own thoughts, and I don't sanitize what I'm thinking particularly. It's just a blog and it's a post, and my thoughts will change over time, as they sometimes do. Things will change, opinions will change, experiences will change me. So I think I personally would like to see like a featured blog post by a board member and have it more frequently done than it is at the minute. I think it doesn't have to be writing even, it could be like a little video or something like that. I've tried videos before. The kind of comments I get back are things like, oh, I really love your voice, it really relaxing, it makes me sleep. And I just think, well, actually, if you, I could do that anytime, but I would really like to understand better what people want to see. I've been trying to write blogs and communicate, and I still feel I'm not getting the engagement I would like. I've tried Twitter hours, actually. I tried those as well. The first one started quite well, and then ended up people from the United States commenting about how bad British food was, and it just seemed to go off from there. And it's nice because it's accessible, but I'd like us to see something, have a more formal set of Twitter hours where maybe we could keep back in track so that I'm not having to explain to people what a UK version of a biscuit is, for example.
Okay. So my next question is a little, so I'm a very much relational engine transaction kind of person. If you were going to give one example, so it's kind of a two-part question. If you're going to give me one example of something that I could do in the business analytics world that would benefit an organization that is primarily transactional but does very little business analytics, what would that be? And then the second part of that is, what could PASS do to enable that same education for their members?
I think to answer the first part, the very first thing I think that individual could do is learn about how to store even larger amounts of data, even larger amounts of relational data, because the world of data is just going to increase. And I think what PASS can do, I'd like us to see have a bit more content in terms of data architecture. So what I see a lot in my consultancy, in my day-to-day work, what I do see is people are not sure when something becomes a big data problem. So that's you moving from being a guardian of the data to asking the questions about, well, are we doing the right thing from the strategic perspective about the data? And when do we know when to flip? And I think what PAS could do is, I'd like personally to see more content asking those sort of questions and answering them, because it's not just about say partitioning better or something like that. Sometimes you have to take a step back and say, well, actually, so we're on SQL Server 2012. How do we actually upgrade? At what point does it become absolutely necessary to do that? How can I sell that to my boss? How can I plan that? And how can I cope with this so that the data is even bigger than it was before? That's what I would do.
Okay, great. So this will be the last question, and we've had a couple of our attendees ask it of other candidates, and it hasn't been mentioned this time, but I wanted to bring it up. And it talks about growing PAS internationally, and obviously you being from the EMEA region, you've seen some experience with that, and that's something that you certainly focused on your time on the board. Any thoughts on things that PAS can continue to do to grow internationally?
I think we've seen great growth in some areas, but not so much others. So I think SQL Saturday has been a great example. So Tim and Carla, the team have done a fantastic job there. I think in terms of growing internationally, I would like to see, I guess, more chapters. I've found I run a little chapter in Hertfordshire, in Watford, just outside London, and I'd like to see more chapters, but I'd like to see more variety of chapters. So I noticed when I took up the helm at the SQL Server user group, I noticed that I was getting more business analytics people attending, possibly because it was being run by me. So I think I started to change the content so that it matched the footfall that I was getting. But then I thought, well, if people add the DBA crowd, then they can go to the London user group, which is not far, and it's much larger than my small one. And I'd like to see the situation where user groups like that are seen as complementing each other and not in competition of each other. I understand people can get quite territorial, but it's not about that. It's about making PAS larger and not excluding existing members from doing anything. It's more about extending the content, extending the audience, growing the speakers. And I think that's the mark of a true leader, actually, is about empowering other people, and about being a true leader. It's all about giving power away to other people to enable them to do things better. It's not about trying to keep everything in one area. So I think that's how PAS could grow, particularly in Europe, is just offering a great variety. I wouldn't call BA groups chapters. I think that might end up being quite American sounding. So something like a conference or something like that might be more gentle, and also having it very, very well defined so that it is clearly aimed at the business decision makers and the business users and the architects, and not SQL Server DBAs who might be very, very bored by the content.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. With that, I want to thank our attendees for coming. Thank you for the questions that you submitted. Jen, thank you for your service on the board, and thank you for running again.
Yes, so thank you for having me. Thank you for this opportunity.
I want to remind you all, if you have further questions, you can go to the discussion forums on the PAS selection site. And with that, we'll close it out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.